Okay, so this is step 2 of the orthographic projection drawing. And the first step, we got our construction lines laid out on the A-size sheet of paper, which is what you're looking at right here. So you want to make sure you've watched step 1 first to know how to lay this out. And it's based off of this drawing. And now what we're going to do is start to lay construction lines out for all of the features that we see here. So I'm going to only do this on the top view, because I think once I show you what I mean about laying out the construction lines for the features, you're going to understand what you need to do for the bottom view. And then we'll stop the video there and we'll go to step 3. So step 2, and so I'll erase this here because now we're on step 2. Is to identify where all these features are. So I'm going to start with locating the center line for these two features here on the top view. So we want to find the center between these two lines here. The height of the top view is 2.5. So I want to use my scale and measure 1.25 inches. So there's 1.25 inches right there. And if you don't have a rolling ruler like I have, just make a mark twice. Do it in 2 different spots. And then use your straight edge that you're using to line it up with those 2 dots. So you can see that I have those 2 dots right there. And I want to take my straight edge and line them up with those 2 dots. And the trick is to put a pencil on one of the dots and then shift the rolling ruler until it goes just underneath it, or shift the straight edge I should say, and you're just doing a construction line still, so you're going to put a light line in there. That doesn't look very straight, does it? So let me just make sure I did the right measurements for both of those. Doesn't look right. It probably isn't. So let's try that again. I might have just hit the wrong mark here. So this should be 1.25. Yeah, I think I was off by quite a bit. And 1.25. So somehow I just got off a little bit there. Line up on those 2 points and make your construction line. Look at how much I was off by. That's a lot. That's a big difference. So trust yourself and trust your work. If it looks right, then it probably is. So now I want to go from the edge here over 0.75, and then I want to go from that line 1.25, and then from that new line to 1 inch. This is called a continuous dimension. You're measuring from each new line that you create. So I got to remember 75, then 125, and then 1 inch. So I can do it this way by starting here, do 75, and then move the whole scale over, go 1.25, and then move the whole scale over and go over 1 inch. And do that twice again if you are concerned about making sure that those are parallel. But if you have a rolling ruler like I do, you can just line it up with the first line and roll it to the first marker and draw a construction line. Roll it to the next marker, draw another construction line. And notice that I'm not having these construction lines go through the entire part. As if you have too many construction lines, you can lose track of what's what. So by making those a bit smaller than the width of the part, I know those have to do with the features that are in the center. And now we want to put in construction lines that define where these lines are here and then where these lines will be. So those are a 1/2 inch in, and that's 4.5 inches to this edge, or where this line should be, and then another 1/2 inch in. So I'll start off with the 4.5 inches, make a mark, and then I know I'm going to go a 1/2 inch in from there, so I'll just mark it on the 5 inch as well. And then from the edge, from the top, I will make a mark at where 1/2 inch is in both directions as well. So again, pick up your straight edge, and you don't have to use the same line. If all your lines are parallel, you can go to the closest line, put a construction line there, put a construction line here, and then I'm going to put a construction line at these 50 marks here, there, and there. All right, so now I have the beginnings of this object starting to take shape. I can see where the features are going. Let me just make sure that stays in camera. So I know the center of the notch is here, the center of the circular hole notch is here, the centers I should say, and then there's the object lines from the top view. And then here in the corners we know we have some radiuses. So one of the things you can do to prepare for that is look at the radius dimension. Radius is 0.6. And decimal inch might work better with this one if you have decimal inch, which I think this is set up as decimal inch. Let's see, no, that's set up as eighth. If you don't have decimal inch, 60, let me see, I'm looking for decimal inch right now, and I don't have one. 60 is about the same as, let's see what 60 is in, well, it's 0.75, 0.15 inches less than 0.75. So let me see here. We'd be somewhere between, I think we're looking at a little bit more than maybe 5/8 or something like that you could probably get away with. So this is a 0.5. 5/8 would be 0.625. So let's do that. So I'm going to move over from the 0, 5/8, and then do the same thing in this direction. And the reason I'm doing this is so that I can line up my circle template with it and get the right size circle. And then I can also, if I don't have a circle template, it's going to be a lot easier for you to measure or to lay out the arc there by finding those dimensions. So I'm just going to very lightly here make a center mark basically for those arcs, those half or quarter rounds I would say, because we're creating a fillet basically. It's going to create a quarter round, and I want to scroll over to here and just make a mark there and there. And again, I don't want to make those full on so I don't confuse what's going on here. Like this is the center for that notch, this is the center for those radiuses there on the corner. So I just want to be careful to make the construction lines so I can understand them and read them later and use them correctly for the rest of the layout of the drawing when I start actually adding object lines. So last step is to get the widths of these two notches in place and get an idea of where those dimensions are going, or where those notches are going to fit in. So I can see from looking at the dimensions here that both the notch in the front and the width of the inside of this slot here are 0.76. I'm going to use 0.75 because I can measure that a lot easier with this scale, and being 1/100th of an inch off on this drawing is perfectly fine. So I want to do half of 0.75, which would be 0.375, or we have 12/16 here. So half of 12/16 would be 6/16. So 2, 4, 6/16 would be right here, 3/8. Okay, so you're going to make a mark here and then a mark at 0.75 or 3/4 and use that. So we have to do a little bit of math, a little bit of calculating, because I'm going off the center of that line to locate those features, and I'm going to put a construction line all the way back to here for those two, because it's going to take care of both that notch and that slot. So these arcs here, if you can think about it, are going to be doing something like this, right? They're going to be tangent to those two lines I just created. So that's going to take up about that much space, and then this arc is going to do something like that. So you can start to see it taking shape. And then I know enough now to be able to put in those arcs like this, and now we've really starting to see that top view take shape. The other construction lines I'd put here is the fact that we have a thickness to this raised surface, which would be called a spot face. And the thickness of that can be figured out by taking 1.26 and subtracting that from 0.76. So 1.26 minus 0.76 would be 1.56, I believe. No, 1.5. No, zero point 0.5. I'm sorry. It would be 0.5. And so if we take 0.5 and divide it into half, because that means that it's going to be 1/4 of an inch on either side of that. Let me just make sure I did that math right. I'm going to take my calculator out and just make sure. So 1.26 minus 0.76 is 0.5. Divide that by 2, and we've got 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so I did that math right. I always like it when I do the math right in my head. So I need to take my scale here and measure 1/4 of an inch up on this side and 1/4 of an inch down on the other. And then I need to add 1/4 of an inch to the radius of, what's the radius? Of 0.76. It's actually, I use 0.75, so 0.75 divided by 2 is the diameter, so 0.375 plus 0.25 means that I'm doing around 60 or 0.625 or 5/8 again. So I'm going to go from the center that I found already and go over to the 5/8 mark, and that is the same as 1/4 of an inch. So from the center, whoops, let's go to 5/8 like that. Here's 5/8 and make a mark. And then that's how I know that where those lines are going to go. So I'm going to put the construction lines for that here, but I'm going to show those construction lines just crossing the center line construction lines for the center of the arcs. And then I know that these arcs are going to do something like this when I'm done to create that raised surface. Okay, so you can kind of lightly sketch that in so you can see what that's going to look like. And so the top view now is ready to go for adding object lines and hidden lines and center lines. But I would probably go ahead and add all of the features to the bottom view first before I started to add the actual real lines for the drawing. That way if you make a mistake, you're only erasing a construction line right now. And then sometimes you realize you make a mistake after laying out the construction lines for the bottom view, and you're like, oh, this isn't lining up. I see I made a mistake. So you can make those corrections now. So that is step 2. And it is perfectly acceptable, as I said, to take a dimension like a 0.76 and make it an easier dimension to work with when we're drawing by hand. So any dimension you see that's kind of tough to do by hand, or you're using a grid and it doesn't follow the grid, you can manipulate that dimension, but just make sure you're doing that consistently throughout the drawing. So when this is done, this is going to be approximately the same size as what the drawing is telling us, but if we were using AutoCAD, we'd obviously be very precise and put in that exact dimension. So that's kind of the difference between when we draw something by hand and when we're drawing something in AutoCAD. There's a little bit of a difference of how we would approach that. When we apply the dimensions, however, we're going to apply the dimensions exactly the way that we see them here.